And it's not about not having these things. It's about, is there a different way to go about acquiring these things that we want for our lifestyle without killing our own compounding, without killing our own wealth creation? And I want to again say yes. The answer is yes. And the answer is infinite banking. My name is Wayne Dirksen, one of the advisors here at 48 Financial. And again, it's my pleasure to give us a very high level overview of how the infinite banking concept works and why every Canadian would be well advised to take the time to understand it and consider whether it should be implemented in your own financial structures. So in a previous session, we talked about the flow of money, and we talked about many things that have to flow, and understanding the flow and the design, like a plumbing system. If you just track it, you can actually see where it goes. And so when it comes to our own resources, money is flowing, and it's going to flow through our hands. And the question is, where is it going to flow to? And whether you understand it or don't understand it, see it or don't see it, believe it or don't believe it, money is flowing. And in many people's reality, money is not flowing towards them. It's flowing away from them into somebody else's system and making somebody else wealthy at our expense. And so if that troubles us, if that disturbs us, if that concerns us, then I want to suggest that we need to take responsibility and do some productive things by following the flow of our money, understanding where it's going, and then figuring out, can we replumb our system? Can we cut into that line somewhere and splice in and replumb that system so that our money begins to flow back into our own control, into a system we own and control to serve us, our families, and our bloodline long term? And I believe the answer is yes, and I believe the answer is infinite banking. And so allow me, if you would, to just pull up a visual of what this actually looks like so that I can walk us through sort of that high level view. And so what we need to understand is that every dollar we ever earn in our lifetime has got to flow through this income valve. And so it's going to come into this tank, but it can't actually stay in this tank. It has to flow through. It eventually has to get into this inflow pipe. And what we want to understand is that the government monitors this tank very carefully. That's why all dollars have to come in here, because the government wants to understand what their share is of every dollar you ever own or acquire, or asset that you ever acquire, because they believe they have and are entitled to a share. And I would actually say at some level, I'm glad to pay some taxes, because there's many things we enjoy in this country. There's great infrastructure. We've got great resources. We've got all kinds of amenities that I'm glad to pay a share for. But when we start being taxed above and beyond what is reasonable, it's largely driven by the fact that we overspend what we actually have the capacity to manage. And so we start printing money. And when we start printing money, we create a very large problem for our population or our society. And so in Canada, the government has been printing money like crazy, all justified by the pandemic. But the reality is, it will damage our economic system almost beyond repair. And understanding how that flow works will actually come back to haunt you and hurt you. So this is worth taking some time to understand in order to be able to combat that a little bit. One of the things I want us to just understand is this lifetime capital potential. And so what I want to do in this moment is just suggest a 20-year-old that's going to work for 45 years till they're 65. They're going to earn, starting at $60,000 with a 3% cost of living increase. And if they could get 5% on those dollars, that's what I want us to sort of think about. So over their lifetime, if they didn't have to spend any of that money, they're going to earn $5.5 million, but it really generated $16.4 million of wealth. And the question becomes, how much of the $16.4 million will actually still remain in their systems by the time they hit 65, which was their target range of retirement? And I would love to talk about retirement sometime, because I think it needs to be defined so that we can actually understand what it is. Because most people aren't interested in retirement. They're interested in something, but they haven't sat down to define it, to know what that is. And so when they get to retirement, often they're disillusioned because they haven't done good planning. And in fact, that translates into they really haven't been doing the hard work of thinking in preparation for an anticipation of this time that will eventually arrive in our lives. And so we hear these numbers, but let's just take a look at what does that look like when we actually allow these dollars to flow through our hands. And so 16.4 million actually is a lot of money. It is going to translate into a lot of money. And so what I want us to sort of see is the fact that that is growing over our lifetime, and it's really shooting up towards the sky. And so When you turn 65, and for those of you that have turned 65, how much of this 16.4 million is still in your system? It's still in your care. It's still in a structure that you own and control. I suspect that if we could have interaction on this question, we would actually discover pretty quickly that most people would suggest that quite a bit of it's not there. And so what we know is that in Canada, the average savings rate is about 10%, and I'm being quite generous there. So just let's skip all this other stuff. Let's just make this 90% so that we can get this down to 10%. That's all I'm trying to do in this moment. So if our savings rate is 10%, then here's what's happened. All this money has disappeared into somebody else's system, and this little bit is what we've been able to keep, and we now have available to fund our lifestyle when we no longer have an income. And we go, yeah, this isn't the most encouraging conversation I've been part of recently, but the truth is we need to understand what's going on in order to have a combat against it, and a strategy to replumb our system. And so if you're unhappy with where the money's going, you need to take the time to understand the design, understand the flow, and then splice into that system at some point and replumb it so it flows back towards you. But many people just don't do that. And so what happens to this 20-year-old, he's got his income, it comes into this tank, the government's already figured out what their share is. They're pretty happy, but eventually this got to clear this tank and get down into this inflow line. And what happens is it has to go by this tax filter. This valve is open, and some of that money has to go down and pay taxes, and that's highly problematic. Most people find that really disturbing, but don't know what they can do to combat that. And eventually this money goes here, and if it gets past this point, it gets into the outflow, and what happens is it just disappears into the financial abyss. And so we're spending money on good things. We need transportation, we need shelter, we need education, we need food, we need clothes, we need entertainment, we have different devices that we have to have. It's not like they haven't bought anything, but what's happened is they've disappeared. And it's not about not having these things. It's about, is there a different way to go about acquiring these things that we want for our lifestyle without killing our own compounding, without killing our own wealth creation? And I want to again say, yes, the answer is yes. And the answer is infinite banking. And so for many people, what happens is, as this money begins to flow into their system, it flows down here and it gets into this pipeline. Yes, some disappears, but they don't think about shutting this valve off, and so this outflow happens, and then they get down here and they start going, wow, I actually don't have enough money. I need a new car, or I've got to travel, or I've got all kinds of things work is demanding of me. And so what they do is they run out and they borrow that money from somebody else. They maybe put it on credit cards, they maybe borrow from mom and dad, they maybe borrow from grandma and grandpa, they maybe borrow from a bank. But really, if you track and pay attention to the flow of money, what's happened is, because they didn't have enough of their own money, they actually borrowed against their future in order to fund their current lifestyle. And I'm going, that is not a sustainable strategy long term. And so I think those are conversations that people have to actually have. And so, well, what's our option? And I'm saying, well, one of our options is that we would actually plan on a structure right off the get-go that would sort of say, hold it, if we actually understand the flow of money, then we can't allow our money to flow past this point. We need to put a system in place so that we can actually have a place to put some investments and some savings away. And then we have to actually take the time to understand what those things are, because investments and savings are not the same thing. Risk and safety are not the same things. And so people often haven't really thought that through. And so they get caught doing things that they thought were really wise, but may not have helped them. For instance, many people, to avoid this tax filter down here, they come in here and they use this government plan that says, hey, if you don't want to pay tax now, just throw it in here, throw it in this risk tank, just bypass this income tank and put the money right into an investment portfolio. And again, if we're going to track the flow, what we have to understand is that eventually this valve is going to open. Eventually this money is going to flow. Where's it going to flow? It's going to flow right back to the tax filter. It's going to end up right back in the government's coffer. And so one of the things that as a farm boy, I love to sort of ask people is, would you rather be taxed on the one truckload of seed that you're putting in the ground in anticipation of a harvest, or on the 100 or 500 or 1,000 truckloads of grain you're going to get off in the fall? one truckload or 1,000 truckloads of grain? Which would you rather be taxed on? And so by deferring, you haven't really done anything except for postpone the inevitable. And part of our problem is we don't actually have a crystal ball to tell us what the future is going to be. And so when we start running our money into this investment tank, we have this nice growth and we get all excited about it. But what we forget about often is that the government actually gets to speak into this tank a little bit, and they have a share of most of what you're putting your investments into, whether it's a taxable position or a capital gain position. And what I love to ask people is, can you tell me what your marginal tax rate is today? And let's just say for this young guy, we put him in at 35%. Can you tell me what your tax rate's going to be in 5 years' time? That's a great question. I don't know anybody that can tell us what our tax rate's going to be in 5 years' time. I can't find anybody that's not even a little bit anxious over it, because right now our government has spent so much money that they're going to have to come up with money from somewhere. And the only place they have access to getting money really is from private enterprise and citizens. And so I would say we probably want to be very careful about how hard we work to build this tank without putting any safeguards in against the government interfering with that. And so one of the things I want to advocate for is that we maybe want to rethink our concept of buying into the solution that the government has actually offered us. The problem was created with onerous taxation, and the solution was a government-sponsored, qualified, registered plan system. And I'm going, you might want to do some careful thinking about that, and you might want to ask yourself, is that really the best opportunity we have to control the flow of our money? And maybe there's a better way. And so I often say to people, what would it look like for us not to be quite so zealous on the investment tank, but rather put some money in the safe tank? And there's still taxation in the safe tank, but we have some opportunities, if we know what we're doing, to actually put some safeguards against that so that it becomes out of scope for taxation. And so if we can stop that money from disappearing into this pipeline of the abyss by actually calculating how much of this money do we want to stop. And I'm going to say it'd be nice if we could actually send 20% or better up this pipeline, driving it. But what we need to understand is that's going to take some effort. When it gets here, it dropped into the tax tank, it gets here. We need to be intentional with what we're driving up here and what we're putting in the investment tank and what we're putting in the savings tank. And for many people, that isn't carefully thought through. And many people believe that what needs to happen is we need to get our money in here because we need a really good rate of return on our investments in order to make up for our future when we're not working. And we need to have some kind of a system to make up for the fact that we're going to eventually lose this income production, and that's a big problem. And so again, I'm saying this is a really important strategy to understand the flow of money and the design of the system, and then take control of whether that's flowing towards you or whether that's flowing away from you. And so that's really what the infinite banking is inviting you to consider. Is there a way for you to take control of the finances in your life? Is there a way for you to replumb the system so that money flows back to you and you're able to use that while growing your wealth and building security and creating generational wealth and truly into your future bloodline long after you're gone? But that doesn't happen by osmosis. I always tell people, we do not drift to good places. If you fall asleep in your canoe in the river in May, you are going to find yourself in some nervous water, some white water, some rapid water. The current is going to take you to the most aggressive, dangerous position on the river. And that's what I would like to suggest to people. That's what's going to happen in your own financial life unless you take control and steer the ship and replumb the system so that the money ends up back in your care, and then figuring out how do we actually leverage that money and how do we actually preserve and protect that money and allow the uninterrupted compounding of our capital to go to work for us every single day. So hopefully this has been helpful and informative, and I look forward to what future sessions might and could look like.